When we think about how managers are correlated to employee engagement, managers are often the lever of things like salary, things like professional development, things like well-being programs for their employees.
Right.
And if the managers aren't receiving training or ongoing knowledge about what are those opportunities for them to help their employees develop, it becomes a magnifier for the problems. So the problems that the managers feel and the underdevelopment that they have is only magnified when it goes down to the individual employee.
If managers are the bridge between strategy and execution, what happens when the bridge starts to crumble? In this second special episode with returning guest, Dr. Katie Gaebel, we kick off a new 3-part Heliona series called The Manager Crisis. Katie, a researcher, speaker, and culture strategist, joins me to unpack Gallup's 2025 State of the Global Workplace report, with a focused lens on the manager crisis outlined between pages 7 to 25 and 94 to 98 for reference. We explore what's really driving disengagement, why burnout among middle managers is rising, and what organizations must do to support the people they rely on most. Katie brings a powerful blend of data and humanity to this conversation, reminding us that behind every performance metrics is a human being, often a manager, trying to hold it all together. If you lead people, report to someone, or are simply curious about what's breaking and what could fix it, this conversation is very essential. So let's get into it. Today, we want to talk about the manager crisis. And before I get into it, how are you feeling as a manager, as someone who is a chief people officer in a very blue collar industry?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, the concept of manager in crisis encapsulates so much. I feel it and see it at the macro level, industry-wide. I would say even globally, the pressures that are happening, the fracture points that are happening for managers. And then at the individual manager level, it is felt and magnified even more so. So on a daily basis, it's across the board, different areas, but a lot of it really comes down to the lack of clarity and just a ton of ambiguity in the world we're operating in right now.
Wow. Well, thank you for that, because that kind of cue in what we're going to talk about, which is the Gallup's global state of global state of workplace mental health.
Yeah.
And it's for 2025 for reference. And there's a stat that I want to share, and we can kind of talk about it. And this is something that I've shared on this podcast, which is 70% of employee engagement is determined solely by, the managers. And now we're talking about managers in crisis. What's your take on that massive amounts of responsibility and capacity that managers have to take on just to make sure that their workplace is functioning?
Yeah. Managers they're especially middle managers. They sit at this unfavorable place with any company where they are both a microphone and kind of they have to be listening, and they have to be speaking, and they have to be advocating for both what executive wants and what their individual employees want. And so it's this unenviable place of constantly a microphone for both, a megaphone for both, and their voice gets lost in it. No one is advocating for them. No one is holding space for their needs in all of this. And so for me, it's absolutely no wonder that they are the ones in crisis right now. And we're seeing it even more so. I mean, the female manager decrease of well-being is 7% in this latest Gallup workplace poll.
Right.
And so when we think about how managers are correlated to employee engagement, we think about the idea that managers are often the lever of things like salary, things like professional development, things like well-being programs for their employees.
Right.
And if the managers aren't receiving training or ongoing knowledge about what are those opportunities for them to help their employees develop, it becomes a magnifier for the problems. So the problems that the managers feel and the underdevelopment that they have is only magnified when it goes down to the individual employee.
So why do you think that this problem is still like overlooked? It's, you know, especially in, for example, you don't have to put yourself in the hot seat, but in your industry, or any other industry at large that you may be aware of, why do you think it's like overlooked, especially when it comes to fixing culture? And I'm air quoting here for those listening.
Yeah. You know, I've worked in a lot of different industries, worked in higher education, worked in nonprofit, and now being in a male-dominated industry, there are definite patterns that I see, which is it's always contingent on the manager to do more with less. They're being asked to carry more than they have the capacity to carry. And some of that is, you know, it's kind of the old story of employee comes into an organization, they do the job that they're hired for really, really well. The only way that we really conceive of people receiving reward or pay for doing a job really well is to make them a manager.
Right.
But what the missing link is there is that someone who is an individual contributor or someone who does something technically really well, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've received professional development or training or have the components and competencies to be a manager.
Right.
And so when we create managers from people who do the technical skill really well, we create a whole bunch of confusion and ambiguity. If their role isn't well defined, if they're not well supported, they're in this kind of paradox of, okay, well, I did this thing really well, and now I'm promoted, and I don't think I'm supposed to be doing that thing anymore.
Right.
But I don't know how to do anything else because management has never been shown to me or explained to me. So that's where we maybe get some micromanagers coming in. And when we talk about employee feedback, one of the things I've consistently heard across any industry is that my manager is a micromanager. I don't like that. I want autonomy. And there's a lot to dig into there and unpack because oftentimes managers who haven't been well equipped with competencies and skill sets are going to rely on the thing they know the most, which is that technical skill that they did really well.
And like this is something very common, like in the tech space, because that's kind of like my industry.
Yeah.
We have really good, like developers that would get, like promoted to manage other developers, and they're like, I don't know what I'm doing. How am I supposed to manage all these people? What do I do? And like to your point, there's no continuum of training for them, or even prepping them to become managers. Why do you think that happened though? Especially, for example, on the position of the, like the C-suite that decided to promote these individuals because they see that they excel at the task that they're doing at hand. Why do you think they decided they just decide to promote them without prepping them?
I think there are a number of kind of pain points we can point to around there. One is the assumption that we make that as an individual, especially in kind of American workplace culture, to move up, we have to manage people in order to get to whatever promotion or whatever title we want. Management is just a part of that process. So it's almost like I have to do it versus I'm really passionate about helping people succeed and removing barriers to their success. I can't tell you the number of career conversations I've had with individuals where I ask them, like, wave a magic wand. What does your career look like? What does success look like to you? And what are roles at this organization that seem really appealing to you that you would be interested in exploring? And they talk about certain roles, But they talk about them with things like, well, that role has influence, that role has prestige, that role has status. Very, very rarely do I hear, I can impact more people and I can be successful in a people management or a cultural management position. So just the natural way that we've groomed employees in our work culture in America is that it's a necessary evil to begin to manage. And I know that's a blanket statement. There are people who are passionate about it.
Right.
But based on my work, that's often what I see is like, well, I know I have to do it at some point just to get to where I want to be.
Right.
And so when we aren't really attuned to listening to our employees, we end up promoting people who are like, well, I'll take that on, but I'm really more interested in the title or the salary increase. And C-suite is not necessarily attuned or engaged with those conversations on a daily basis. So I think that's another secondary breakdown, is that there are just assumptions made of, okay, well, we're promoting our high performers. Yes, we always want to focus on our high performers, but what are they performing well in, and what do they continue to need development in? And those are two things that sometimes companies just don't have time to spend.
So like, how can a company identify what are the things that they excel at, and are they even interested in becoming managers?
Yeah, I love that question. There are so many places in the employee life cycle. For me, I would start that conversation in the job interview stage. Let's talk about it. I love also using assessments as triangulation, not assessments in isolation of a decision-making factor for hiring or not hiring. But an assessment can tune us in and attune us to certain qualities that may not be present if someone's just a really good interviewer.
Right.
They know how to answer questions, they know how to respond, they know how to be present. So I'd say step one, looking for knowledge, skills, and disposition. Really getting crisp as an organization. When you hire, technical skills can easily be taught, but it's those attributes, those soft skills, quote unquote soft skills that I call them universal competencies, because if we don't have those, we're not going to be able to really move anywhere within a company. And then, is the company having regular career conversations? And underlying that is creating a company of psychological safety, which may be for another podcast.
Right.
But using something like I use, which are stay interviews and stay plans. So these can either be done by an HR representative or the manager themselves if there's a lot of trust built within that organization. But it's 6 questions. You ask every employee the same 6 questions, and you look for patterns that point to macro issues in your company. Like, oh, no one is saying that they get access to professional development. What can we do about that?
Right.
And then you look for micro examples. It could be by team, it could be by gender. You can begin to kind of slice and dice that whatever way you want to look at the data. But having those regular conversations outside of a normal check-in that you have with your employee really gives them a container and a space to put those conversations they may not feel comfortable sharing.
Right. So how often should companies do those assessments?
Yeah, I recommend at least once a year. So I recommend doing an initial, like using some type of tool assessment when you hire, again, to triangulate where they are, what are some spots that we need to pay attention to for development of that person, and then doing a stay interview once a year. That's combined with a stay plan. So once that interview is completed, the stay plan is really like, what are our actionable outcomes or items as a manager and an organization that we can do to continue to support this employee? Right. It's not adding KPIs, it's not adding goals or rocks or whatever you use at your organization. It is all about supporting that individual. And most of the time, those are low cost or no cost items.
Right.
employees don't actually want all that much when you have the conversation with them. But right now, we are such in crisis in our workplace that the only way employees know how to ask for recognition and visibility is through salary. Right. I want to raise, because what underlies that is I want to be validated for the work that I'm doing, and I don't feel like people are seeing my contribution.
Right.
So when we train managers to have stay plans and stay interview conversations, our employees are that much more engaged. But our managers don't know how to hold space for that. They're not trained in that right now.
Yeah, like so much responsibility. I love that you put language around your stay plans and like stay interviews, because that's something I've actually never heard of.
Yeah.
Of like using that language to better articulate what a manager should be focused on. Because again, to your point, some of these managers get like promoted, but they're still doing what they were doing.
Yes.
Which is the company's way of trying to maximize.
Yep.
But the manager should focus on the teams that they're managing and how they can better support them and also retain them as much as possible, and then also building trust. So what's getting in the way of supporting managers well? Is it like a buy-in thing, a budget thing? Because I know companies want to have managers do as much as possible. Capacity becomes a problem. But like, what's getting in the way of supporting them?
I think it certainly depends on the industry, but a few things that come to mind, and you hit on a couple of them. But one for me is have the decision makers, which is typically the executive team in that organization, have they even been exposed to healthy managerial practices themselves? And if not, how can we expect them to turn around and support and provide healthy managerial practices to their middle management? So I would start at the top and ask some questions of, like, what's healthy for them? What's normal for them? And sometimes you find that, oh, well, we don't want to slow down long enough for this training. Our company requires us, or our industry requires us to move quickly. And then the response I would have would be, well, when you have employee turnover, you can't move quickly at all, because all you're doing is retraining and onboarding, and the costs associated with that can be 2 to 3 times the salary of that person who left.
Right.
So there's a perception that if we're moving, we're succeeding, but it's not true at all, because I have seen many companies lose that middle management layer, and then they're like, well, what do we do now? Or they're surprised, why did they leave? So I'd say starting with the executive leadership to really dig in, what have they been trained in? What do they believe are kind of the cultural tools at their own organization to support managers? And then showing the nuts and bolts of, ongoing manager training really is a necessary component for selling or for growing or for innovation. It isn't separate. It doesn't detract from the bottom line. It actually enhances the bottom line. So understanding the language that executives speak and speaking that language to them. And as HR people and working in people and culture, I know that can feel frustrating, because it's like, these are our people and our people are suffering, and shouldn't that be enough? Right. But sometimes we're just not speaking the same language. And so that language is, what's the ROI? How does this contribute to the EBITDA? And things like that, and tapping into their language that they use. And that does require for us as people and culture professionals to learn some language outside of what we're normally used to speaking.
Right. So what kind of, learning or like development is required for C-suite to like maybe, update their language a little bit?
Yeah.
Because I talk to a lot of very wealthy people, very they're all just money mindset. Everything they talk about, to your point, like EBITDA is one of their favorite things. Yes. They live and breathe with whatever that's on that table.
Yep.
How do we go about, helping C-suite when they're in charge of making decisions or even green lighting what help looks like?
Yeah.
Right? How do we go about making sure they can identify that themselves and understand that this is for, it's going to help your own bottom line first, because that's the language they speak, the ROI. And in turn, taking care of your managers will help take care of your people. The 70% that, engagement is depending on the middle managers. So what does that look like? I'm trying to crack my brain.
Yeah. So if are you asking hypothetically, if I were an HR person at a company going in to try to
leadership, C-suite, and trying to help them understand that you need to change your language. You also need the training and development in order to help your managers and the rest of the teams.
Yeah. I have learned, so one of the things I use in some of my trainings and keynotes is this concept of what tool are you when you show up, when you try to have a persuasive conversation with someone? Are you a sledgehammer? Are you a screwdriver? Are you duct tape? How do you step into difficult and crucial conversations? I used to be a sledgehammer, and I used to just kind of go in and be like, I need to advocate for my people no matter what. And if I just hit hard enough, that doesn't work. Yeah. It doesn't work. And it actually creates more distance between people and culture and the executive team.
Right.
So switching to leading with curiosity and not making assumptions about why they are not supporting these initiatives. Asking critical questions like, hey, I just want to understand, what training have you all been exposed to as you made your way up in this organization? Have you come in at the level of C-suite, or did you move up? So was this a tenure versus talent thing within your organization? What are some things you think are holding the team back today? How do you think our managers are missing the mark on living out our values as an organization? So just asking questions, that's the first place I would start, because if that HR representative isn't represented in executive leadership, and that's a whole other conversation about people and culture being a true strategic partner in an organization. But if they're not represented, finding out what's actually happening with that team and who is actually advocating for the people in that organization. So step one is asking really good questions, being like an investigative journalist, and then coming back maybe in a second conversation and taking the language that they use and then designing a response that's crafted towards, hey, here are the pain points I heard you point to. Here are some potential blind spots I'd like to shine the light on a little bit more, even if it's just here with the executive leadership. And here are some patterns across the organization that show the fractures that I think we could address together as a team, from a financial perspective, from a marketing perspective, from a technology perspective, and really leading from a place of not just people and culture, but this is a holistic effort. It takes everyone.
Wow. I love how you just painted all of that. I hope people receive it that way, because that's one of my biggest things. It's like most of the time when I talk to companies, I see that the managers are always, they see the vision, they want the help, and then also the teams also see the vision, they want the help, but then getting C-suite on board is the hardest thing ever.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's this is a way to help your managers, and they're like, wait, what? I mean, I think they're fine, they're doing a great job. But then the manager's saying, we want this. And then, when it comes to solutions, I feel like it's really hard for the C-suite to see the vision and actually want to take action, because sometimes it could be they're just stuck in their ways and just want to do that, which you touched on, tenure and talent. Yeah. Can you break that down a little bit? Because that's something that I hear a lot of, which is better, tenure or talent? What are the pros and cons? Do you have an answer to that?
I think in a lot of industries we're facing that same question. So working in higher education, tenure is literally a process you go through as a professor. Having been a professor, I was exposed to kind of the first round of the tenure process, and they have it very defined in academic institutions where you have to basically convince and persuade people you are worth tenure. And once you achieve tenure after a certain number of years at an institution, you have a different status and different protections. But it's basically justifying your existence at that institution. And so the process is extremely difficult. It's psychologically very taxing for that individual professor to go through. In organizations, that process isn't as well defined. There's a lot of unspoken expectations around who's considered in and when they're considered in.
Right.
And, what does it mean to be quote unquote seasoned in this industry versus quote unquote new to this industry? I've worked at places where there are people that if you weren't born into the industry, you're never going to be like a part of that industry. You're always going to be considered new talent. Yeah, you're always going to be considered an outsider who's come in to it. And there's a certain pride that comes with that insider perspective. But where I think the tenure piece misses the mark is that it assumes someone who's been in the industry hasn't stagnated. They have continued to innovate and grow. They have rightfully earned the status and the titles that they've received, versus someone who comes in with talent who has to justify. They have to basically, every time they're in a space, why are you in this space? And especially in industries where it's about sales, it's about ROI, and you're in a role like mine, well, what ROI are you contributing? You're not out there selling, so why should we pay your salary? What are you actually doing here? And so I think the talent piece is much more important now for our upcoming generations, because they want to stay at companies. We saw this kind of pendulum swinging with millennials, where millennials tended to leave organizations every 2 to 3 years.
2 years.
Talent left, and there were a lot of reasons for that. Now we're seeing the pendulum swing the other direction, and indicators are pointing to Gen Z really looking at companies for the long haul. They're asking questions about internal growth, about 401k, about retirement opportunities, and they're in their early 20s. And so the idea that they want to stay and grow means that company needs to respond in a certain way to it. So I think that there are blind spots when we look at tenure, and a lot of those blind spots really come from the old guard and the assumption in generations past of you put in your time at a certain level, then you really know the business. If you start at this level, working in a warehouse, or you come in as, I'll use higher education as an example. You come in as a teacher's assistant, and then you work your way up. Maybe you're a lab assistant, and then you're a research assistant. But all of these things mean that now you have earned your stripes, to use kind of a military term.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Another thing that I want to talk about is something that you mentioned earlier. You talked about just what kind of ROI does people in HR bring.
Yeah.
And to me, I've talked to so many different people in HR, and I know what they bring in is like retaining the people, which is usually the most costly thing for people. In the Gallup report, I know they talked about just the cost of like engagement, and which also plays on the retention part. Can you break that down for me a little bit? you like referenced it earlier during our conversation, and I know this is a global number.
Yeah.
And just how much can we increase our GDP by just having a good engagement?
Yeah. So according to Gallup, and I've got the numbers in front of me. So the U.S. is at 31% engaged in our companies right now. So only 31% of our employees are engaged in our companies. If we were to have 100% engagement, and I know that's aspirational, if 100% were fully engaged, we'd see a 9% increase in our global GDP, and that equates to $9.6 trillion.
Wow.
And even if we were to get to 70% engagement, which is where best practice organizations are. So if all companies were to kind of raise to the level of best practice organizations, the impact to our GDP would be astronomical.
Wow. So the 70% is like a global, rate that Gallup is hoping that companies can meet.
Yeah. So that's kind of the 70% is the global best practice organizations that they have named, and they don't name the companies in particular.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I wish they did, because just so that people can know.
I know. I'd love to know more about what they're doing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's very powerful. Again, that's also what I feel like C-suite needs to understand, that HR and chief people officers bring to the table. Because I know they don't hear things like this very often, and they're not seeking that knowledge or that information as to I feel like there's way too much emphasis on sales and what they bring.
Yeah.
But sales can only sell so much. Yep. But the people that are keeping the customer on the customer success side, the HR group that are making sure that people are happy, and wanting to stay in the company, because we know that people living costs so much money. Another thing that I want to talk about, which I'm going to sidetrack from the Gallup report, is something that I've actually come up with based off of all the conversation that I've had on this podcast, which is, which you actually added one more C to that. Initially, it was the 3 C's of just like retaining people, which is clarity, communication, and also capacity. And you added crisis as the 4th C. I want us to break that down, starting from the clarity piece. And I can share my thoughts as well as to why I decided to focus on that. My most recent, my guest, I think 2 episodes ago, Dr. Michael Macklin, kind of actually beautifully painted that. And he was coming from a place of like, this is how you keep people, and these are the 3 steps on how you can keep people. And the way he just brought everything together, it just kind of made sense in my head. So to start, clarity. What do you think of clarity when it comes to workplace?
Well, I think all of these are absolutely connected to one another. I don't think I could separate out clarity and communication, because I think what I hear consistently across industries, across different companies, is that communication between leadership and the rest of the organization is failing.
Right.
And when you dig into that, it's very hard for people to actually name, okay, well, we receive too many emails. We don't get enough emails. We don't see people it's behaviors, but underlying those behaviors is really, what are the expectations of us as individuals in this organization? So that to me goes to clarity. What does this company expect of me? Is that outlined in my job description? Is my manager consistently communicating that and providing clarity if there's a shift there? And then clarity, and can I as an employee connect my why to the company's why? So if that clarity isn't there for me, will I still remain engaged? And very likely those people won't stay engaged if they can't draw that straight line between their why and the company's why. So that's how I feel about clarity. What's your definition of clarity?
I mean, I love the way that you broke it down. Mine, just based on all the conversation that I had on this podcast and many other different outlets, when I hear clarity, I usually put the focus on the employee. I say that clarity is for the employees. Clarity is for the employees to know, what the hell are we supposed to do here? Why are we even hired? Why are we here? And I put the responsibility on the manager to communicate that, to get that communicated to the team, and then also put the responsibility again on the manager with the C-suite to demand that clarity. Sometimes that could be, it could be the C-suite's responsibility, but the manager's job is to make sure he get or she get the clear communication from C-suite, so that they can make sure that they're very clear with the rest of the people on the team. So that's kind of like how I draw the connection based on the conversation. Can I respond to that?
Sure, yes. You're putting a lot on the manager.
I know, yes, I am. But that's a silver lining for the manager in this equation here.
Yeah. Well, for me, I absolutely agree that the manager plays a critical component in that piece of clarity, because, like I said earlier, if the executive team is setting strategy, it's up to the manager to take that strategy that's being communicated, or if it's not being communicated, to go and seek clarity on that strategy so they can turn around and create things that can be executed on, projects, initiatives, measurables. That's up for the manager to kind of discern and create. I would kind of widen the lens one more step and say, can the executive leadership even name their own clarity on direction and vision, other than we got to sell a bunch of stuff, or we got to get a bunch of customers to sign up for this thing? Like, what is the overall vision? And if they can't name it, can they expect their managers to translate that into executable strategy?
No, yeah, and that's why I put the pressure on the manager to seek clarity. Because when they're getting that, whatever the tax may be from C-suite, their goal is to get clarity from them. This could be, again, putting pressure on the C-suite, making sure they even know what the hell they want. And sometimes it depends on the industry or how safe the manager feels to even want to challenge the C-suite and be like, okay, you told me to do this, but it doesn't make sense. Can you help me understand so I can let my team know or different departments know what we're supposed to do? And then also, again, clarity. This also would help C-suite understand why just like continuous training and development is very important in the workplace, because they have to know what the hell is it that they're trying to do in the company, so the managers can have clear, communication from them in order to translate that to the rest of the people. So the managers have to be proactive. They have to be given that freedom to be proactive, to be, to be the advocate for the people, but also partner for the C-suite. Make sure they get, hey, I know you hired me to do this. I'm really good at doing what I'm doing, but I can't do it unless you tell me what is it that you want. Kind of like a patient and doctor relationship. A doctor has to come in and ask you all these questions, like, diagnose and get as many feedback from you, the patient, in order for the doctor to go back and tell the nurse, hey, this is what you need to do. So the same relationship. So I see the patient as the C-suite exec, and I see the doctor as the manager, and I see the nurse as the employees, the team members. That's where my brain goes from. Because the doctors, they have the pressure to get it right. Because if you don't get the right information from the patient and you prescribe the wrong medication, then you could lose your license or even get sued or something like that. But it's genuine on the doctor side because they enjoy doing that. Again, to your point, that we have to make sure we have the right managers actually doing that.
That's right.
Not just promoting anyone because they're a good salesperson. They could be assholes.
They could be great at selling and
suck at managing.
And great as an individual contributor. And all they want to do is go out and close a deal.
And they don't want to manage.
And they see anything standing in the way of that as an impediment, including managing.
Because they're like, I don't have time for these people. I need to
I don't want to train them. I don't have time for that.
I have goals to buy this Porsche.
That's right.
Why am I dealing with all these people? But the company say, you excel at what you do. Here's a management position, which
there
sucks.
You go.
But okay, the next C, communication, which we've talked about. I want to hear your part first. Or do you want me to start and you can add on? Or do you want to start?
You start this time. I started with clarity. You start this time.
So the way that I see communication, communication is for the managers. It benefits the manager. Meaning leadership and teams need to understand that we're trying to help managers get as much feedback as possible. We need to be as communicative as possible, meaning to my example, the doctor, patient, and the nurse. Here is reverse. Here, the employee is the patient.
Okay.
Sorry. The manager is the patient here.
Okay.
Back to my example, the doctor is the execs. They need to make sure they ask the manager as much questions as possible in order to get feedback from the teams. What are the teams telling you? What are you getting from the team?
Yeah.
And the manager need to make sure that they talk to as many people in the team as possible. That's where the communication piece happens. This could be one-on-ones. This could be a way to have the freedom to go talk to your team and or have the, which would be the next C capacity, to talk to your teams, to get that information from them, to understand where they're at, how are they doing? Are they struggling with a task right now? And now their C-suite job is to make sure that they're getting as many, sharing as many information with the manager as possible, so the managers knows what are the goals of this project, what do we need to do, so that when they go and listen to the people, foundationally they know what the goals are. Now they trying to identify how can we help our teams do this effectively, because now they know what the goals are. They can go with the mindset of I'm listening here. I'm getting what is it they're sharing? How are they seeing the project? How can I let them know, actually, I appreciate this feedback. However, this is what it needs to be done, and this is how we can do it as best to the team's ability. Does that make sense as far as
it does?
The way that I'm going
what
about
assumptions underlie that model of communication?
Yeah, so this is basically from my own background,
Yeah.
like running a somewhat small team of 60 something people. Again, I think it's 64, it could be 68. I kind of, that tells you what kind of leader I was.
It's okay.
I saw that communication wise, I wasn't sharing clear details as to what the project was all about. I just assumed that we didn't even call them managers; they were just DPs, meaning director of photography, director of sound, director of this. So director of sounds have their own little teams. Okay. But director of photographer has his own team, or had our own team. And then we have, a bunch of producers, line producers, assistant to the producer, director to the producer. It's like such a big team.
Yeah.
So I am the director and also executive director and also a producer. So I have 3 different positions. Okay. We usually get distributed between 3 different groups. Meaning executive producer funds the project. Okay. And then the producer makes sure that they hire the right director to direct the show. Okay. But I hired myself as a director because this is my baby. Did
you change fedoras so people knew what role you were operating in?
Normally, I had the money to fund it, so I didn't need an executive producer. Yeah. So I was the EP, which also brings so much pressure to the people, because I'm like, he's the one funding it, he's the one producing it, he's the one directing it. Yeah. So it's like I had so much control, so much power, but I did not communicate to the rest of the directors like. Communication-wise, I wasn't giving them as much details as possible. I had the script that I shared with them, because also I'm the co-writer to the script as well.
Oh wow!
Because again, this is
your baby.
It's my baby. I went all in. Yeah. So communication, I wasn't doing a good job of letting the people know, the directors know what to communicate, what to get from the people on the ground that are actually shooting the film. So the DP sits there and tells the camera operators how to shoot, when to shoot, where to shoot, how many angles we should shoot. And then the director of sound has his own little mics that he would put on every person in frame. And then he had the guy who does the clap thing. So they work with the sound guy, and the sound guy lets them know when to clap and tells them which mic is working, which was not working, whose levels should go up and down. So it's a very tedious operation. Yeah. So I wasn't doing a good job of explaining to the managers, in this sense, the directors, what the vision is, what the overall goal, where do I want this film to be distributed? They didn't know any of that. All they knew is that Abraham is doing a project and he hired us. So they were listening to the people on the ground, and they were just shooting whatever. They were shooting whatever shots, and I was getting annoyed because I'm saying, why are we wasting money shooting an overhead shot that has nothing to do with the script. They're like, well, it's just creative. The location is nice. We wanted to capture the whole location. I was like, no, that's not what I want to do. Just do this, follow the script. But again, I didn't communicate that to the directors to let the people know, because that's that, like misalignment between me, or that separation between me and the team, which is the actual camera operator, the sound operator, and the assistants and all the other people. So that's where the communication piece comes from. So I need to make sure I let the DPs know, all the managers know, what is the goal?
Yeah.
Why do I want this distributed? Or I know we're selling a $99 product. Why are we selling it? All these sort of details that helps the manager understands what to listen to when they're working with the people. Yeah. That is, the clarity has been taken care of. Now communication. What do you think of that?
That's an excellent example. I think a couple things. One piece that's really powerful in that is that it models, when you're a manager and you're doing that well, it models that healthy workplace behavior, both for your team, but also the executive. So it's like this really amazing communication loop where everyone is receiving and kind of co-creating, and being asked to contribute to healthy communication styles. The second thing that you mentioned was the disconnect between someone's why and your why, which is so critical for me. And that's a huge part of like the stay interviews and the stay plans. Can people connect the work that they're doing, the value that they're adding, to the company's why or that project's why? What are they moving forward? What is their individual unique contribution? If they can't name it, or if they say, well, I don't feel like my contributions are actually moving this, they're going to tend to be more disengaged in the company.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And again, this 3 C's, changes depending on who is impacted at that time. Yeah. Right now, like managers are getting, pretty much the brunt of pretty much the crisis that we're talking about today. And the final C, which is the capacity, before we get to your C, crisis. So the capacity again is for the manager, because they understand how much workload each team or each member of the team is currently dealing with. And that is if this person is a good manager at that. They have to be manager. You
saw my eyebrow go up when you said that.
They have to be a manager that actually cares. But capacity is for the management team to understand, but the responsibility is on the C-suite. They need to understand what are they bringing to the body of the organization. How is it impacting the health of the organization at the end of the day? To your point earlier, ROI, and you're not realizing how much pressure you're putting onto that team. Yeah. Do they even have the capacity to run that? Maybe they're tied on so many different projects that you have going on. And as founders, sometimes we get so excited. We keep introducing new projects within companies and adding so much capacity to the rest of the people, and not realizing we're burning them to the ground with just excitement that we come up with, because we come up with an idea.
Yeah, we get passionate about something.
We get passionate. Yeah. We're like, all right, let's add this to the to-do list. And sometimes managers don't have the freedom to like say, hey, this is too much. Yeah. They'll take it on and they'll figure out how to force it onto the rest of the team. That's why for me, capacity is, the pressure is on the C-suite. Do you understand how much pressure you're adding to your own people? Yeah. And maybe you know, especially today, we like see that all the time. Companies are introducing all this AI within their company. They're not training their people on how to use AI, how to prompt properly, but they expect them to have 10-year experience on how to run AI, even though it's just 2 years old or less than that, actually.
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like all of this pressure is adding so many different capacity problems, not only for the manager but for the people. And I say for the manager because if the manager has capacity that they can manage, they're more likely to actually have the mental capacity to deal, to share, to like delegate work within their teams. Because if they're being forced by leadership to do X, Y, Z, they're going to just transition that same energy to the rest of the people. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think what I hear underlying some of this, and tell me if my intuition is not on point with this one, is that the role here also of managers is to be advocates for their individual teams, to turn around to tell C-suite, no, we don't have capacity for this. And so it is a very critical place psychologically and emotionally for managers when they have to be the megaphone for their team.
Right.
Who is being the megaphone for managers in their capacity?
That's a good question there. I see what you did there. You just flipped the coin. But
see what I did there?
Yeah. And like to my example, it's like, the advocate should be the C-suite, because they're the one, delegating or sharing that more work with the management teams. So they have to be the advocate, but they need to understand how to even be the advocate in the first place. Yeah. Which also, again, backs to the equation clarity. There has to be clear vision within the C-suite for the people to know what it is, and the managers to help them communicate that effectively. And hopefully all those two C's are taken care of in order for the final C capacity to be respected, because a lot of people don't really care, honestly. Which I've noticed, unfortunately, with people I've worked with, companies. I would gladly share their name, but I signed some NDAs before they hired me.
We'll bleep it out.
I know. I would have loved to do case studies on all these companies that I work with. But anyway, so if you're planning on hiring me, hey, we do a good job, but but just know that we want to work with people that
just give them an NDA.
Yeah, we want to work with people that we want to help and actually have them accept help, which is the key word here.
Right.
But yeah, anyway, so what do you think of the final C, crisis? I want you to start that, because that's your own baby.
And I think just what you said just now points to that. So companies listening who are resonating with the 3 C's that you outlined, clarity, communication, and capacity, everything that underlies that is the recognition that we need some help here. We need some outside perspective. We need maybe an outside tool or functionality to really boost our managers, because the 4th C I added, it was kind of like clarity plus when you don't have clarity, when you don't have communication, and when you lack capacity, you end up in crisis. And that's where I think Gallup is pointing to, especially for our managers. We find them in crisis because there are breakdowns in all 3 of those C's. And yet the expectation is still add on, I don't care about capacity, or that capacity for that thing doesn't concern me. You still need to get this project done. And I think there are some assumptions. You mentioned AI, the assumption that AI is somehow freeing up all these people's times. And so, now you have so much more capacity to do these things. Well, is that true? Have you measured that at your company? Have you asked the questions? Have you trained your team in what AI actually looks like for your company and how to move things forward? And so I think as we see, and I'm thinking about supply chain issues, I'm thinking about tariffs and the crisis management that we now have to see managers doing. They're on the front lines of the emotional and psychological unrest that's happening in our companies right now. I mean, I work in kind of a trade industry where tariffs can really impact sales. They can impact our numbers. And our employees have line of sight to that. They know that if we raise prices, it's going to be even harder to sell. It's just math. That's how things are. So how are we helping managers with that kind of change management aspect or crisis management aspect? And when we're not, we start telling ourselves stories. So the workplace culture begins to tell itself a story. And that's when people can start leaving, when chaos can take over, and
fear.
And the lack of communication really underlies fear. And because when we're not communicating, people can make up all sorts of stories about what's happening. And I think C-suite, because they have access to so much information and much earlier than the rest of the organization does, they have time to kind of have that initial reaction to something and then kind of sit with it and let it kind of play out in the company. But when employees receive certain information, C-suite can sometimes forget that we need to communicate through kind of a change management communication approach. And that it's okay for employees to be confused or to voice dissent or and so leaving space for some of those natural reactions is really important.
I've been there as an employer, seeing employees being confused. I'm just like, what are you confused about? It makes sense.
Because we've, as executives, we've known that for months. Why are you having this reaction?
We've been sitting on the problem for 2 months and we somehow figured it out in our head. And we just share it with the rest of the team. They're confused. They're like, why are you confused? I know you haven't had 2 months of thinking about this problem.
Exactly.
So you should just go do what I said. So again, grace. We feel like that's a word that we should start using more in the workplace, having grace for one another.
That's right.
Instead of those fancy taglines that everyone has in their offices, like whatever it is, like Gandhi quotes. And they should just have grace for one another. Like that should be the tagline.
I do have some quotes hanging in my office.
What's your favorite one?
Speak your truth even if your voice shakes.
That's grace right there. Your voice is shaking, but you have courage as well.
Yes.
All right, cool. So I want to talk about some solutions that Gallup suggests, as like actionable framework. I think they talked about coaching as one of them, continuing education for management. And as someone who I've spent a lot of time knee deep into this research, what's one or two, and this is up to you, feel free to say as many actionable frameworks that companies can use. Heliona is one of them if you want to use that, but go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, what conversations you and I have had off this podcast point to is that Heliona is going to be a place for managers to support and for executives to be informed about what's happening, and in a very holistic way with a whole bunch of different touch points. And what's super cool for me is, my first question to you was about the ROI. If you remember, like how is C-suite going to learn about ROI from this? And that's all built in there. So you've really thought through every aspect of it. But I think for me, Gallup points to less than half the world's managers say they have received management training. Okay. So if we just start there, and provide management training, so that could be something like how to create a psychologically safe environment, how to hold people accountable on your team, how to have difficult conversations. If we just train managers in those pieces, what could change in a company? My first thought goes to the innovation, the thoughts, the creativity that comes forward, because all of a sudden I feel safe to share something that maybe I didn't before. It really would boost an entire company's vision and strategy if managers receive that training. And then accountability. Managers just sometimes miss the mark on how to measure accountability and how to hold people accountable for things. And that cuts down on productivity, that creates disengagement, that creates quiet quitting. And so if managers had support in that, it could help address and eliminate those other pieces.
Right. Wow. That's a big, issue. Like you said, less than half of the world's managers don't have management training.
That's right. They have no management training whatsoever.
Got exalted to the position.
That's right.
With zero training.
That's right.
Oh my God, that's insane. I haven't read that far. What page number is that?
Page 12. Wow. You haven't read that far.
I thought that was like number 98 or something.
No, this
like,
is in their executive summary where they call out, and they call out 3 kind of actionable items. All 3 of them basically come under one umbrella, which is ongoing support and training for managers.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Wow. I need to go back and report. I had I have a newborn baby, so I was trying to read and prep
I don't
for this
have that.
conversation.
I don't have that excuse.
So
I just have a dog.
Like 90 pages. Wow. Anyway, so we've kind of come to the end of this conversation, and as the regular tradition for Heliona is basically everything that we've talked about here. How is your spirit today?
I am, we talked about some of the quotes hanging in my office, and another one that I want to share as we wrap up is a Brene Brown quote, which is, I'd rather get it right than be right. And it's something that has really...
Wait, that kind of played mental gymnastics. I was like, wait,
so
what?
Instead of being right, I want to get it right.
Okay, getting it right than being right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful right there.
Moving away from my ego. And I think it goes back to that suggestion of leading with questions and curiosity, because I really want to get it right, no matter what company I'm working with, no matter what individual I'm talking to. I want to understand where it's going wrong versus putting in my assumptions about what could be better or what I would do differently, and kind of checking my ego and leading with curiosity.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end it. Again, this has been such a fun conversation. Also, I'm realizing I need to do more reading on the Gallup report, because there's a lot more that would benefit
I'll send you the
me.
Cliff Notes version.
I appreciate that. With your research brain,
that's right.
You have the better eye at finding the right Cliff Notes for conversations like this. Again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And I look forward to people listening to this.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Cool.